All right, thank you. A warm welcome to those attending and to our viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. This is a meeting of the Finance and Corporate Services Select Committee. My name is Councillor John Riley, and I'm the chairman of this meeting. Details of the business to be considered today are shown on the agenda, copies of which are available in the room and online under the live broadcast. For those present in the room and intending to speak, please note that you will be filmed and any statement you make will be recorded and made public. A reminder to councillors, officers and those speaking today that you should turn the microphone button on when speaking. This will ensure you can be heard in the room and by those watching online. A little bit of housekeeping. We're not expecting the fire alarm or any drill, so if the alarm does go off, please follow officers to the fire exits and out of the building to the designated meeting points. For those of you in the room, please switch any mobile devices to silent before the meeting starts, unless you're using it for the meeting. And please note that councillors on the committee may use their laptops or tablets or indeed phones during the meeting to view agenda paperwork. What I will also do is ask that everyone here could just introduce themselves. So if we start with Councillor Mathers.
Councillor Stuart Mathers, Opposition Lead.
Councillor Narinda. Councillor Kaur.
Ian Anderson, Business Manager, Complaints and Inquiries.
Andy Goodwin, Head of Strategic Finance.
Chris Mao, Assistant Director of Financial Management.
Susie Horn, Head of Human Resources.
Dan Kennedy, Corporate Director, Central Services.
Councillor Adam Bennett.
Councillor Kishan Bhatt.
Councillor Wayne Bridges.
All right, thank you very much. So, going to the agenda, apologies for absence.
So apologies have been received from Councillor Banerjee with Councillor Bennett substituting, and also apologies have been received from Councillor Mand with Councillor Kaur substituting.
All right, thank you very much, and you're both very welcome to the committee. Thank you. Okay. Declarations of interest in matters coming before the meeting. We have all the usual ones, so thank you for that. Minutes of the meeting of the 18th of July, which seems a very long time ago now. But as ever, very detailed minutes. We covered a lot of different things, obviously. In particular, we talked about our procurement project, which we'll come back to later on. Any questions on the minutes? Can take these agreed? Thank you. Help if I put my microphone on, I expect. I pressed hard, nothing happened, but there we go. Off you go.
Yeah, just taking you through to the highlights, I suppose. In terms of the volume of informal complaints, there's been a substantial increase from 4473 to 5176, which is 703 more. It's really the only area that's substantially increased, and they were mainly due to two areas. One is waste, and the other is repairs. In terms of waste, it was mainly related to a change of crews covering the routes, and there were some teething issues, and the result is that we had quite a lot of inquiries about missed bin collections and collections not taking place, so we had a fair number of those. We also had quite a number of repair issues, and they were mainly about the time it was taken to actually complete the repairs or the time fixing appointments. They were the mainly sort of informal complaints that we received. The other stages of the complaints process, by and large, year on year, are fairly similar. So stage 1, 816 complaints for last year, and the year before that was 802. Stage 2, for the last year, it was 121, and the year before that it was 102. In terms of the Ombudsman investigation, for 2022-23, it was 46. But the year before that it was 75, so 2021-22 was 75. The main reason for that is that the Ombudsman, during the COVID period, held back some investigations. So what happened is they caught up in that year, so you end up with a slightly higher figure for 21-22. In terms of compliments, a slight reduction. For 2022-23, it was 245, and the year before that it was 349. There was just one reason for that, and that was the introduction of wildflowers for 21-22, which just attracted a massive number of compliments from councillors as well as residents just writing and say how lovely, how pretty, can we keep it going. Those volume of compliments slackened off last year, and that was the main reason for the decrease. Members' inquiries, in terms of 22-23, there was 7,805. The year before that, it was 9,769. To those members' inquiries for 22-23, you need to add 1,023 service requests, because on the 1st of January 23, we introduced the recording of members' inquiries through the GOS system, and when we introduced the GOS system, we also introduced two different terms. One is a members' inquiry, which we defined as one where it requires an investigation and a formal response, but we also introduced something called service requests, which is one-off actions. So that meant that there was the figures are by and large the same, but there was a difference because we introduced a different definition into that. I think I could go on for quite a long time, but I think you probably don't want that. I think they're the main sort of information that I would pass on, and I'm very happy to deal with any questions that you've got.
All right, thank you. All right, Councillor Mathers.
I hope, Chair, you wouldn't mind me a little bit of grace on this, but when looking through the number of complaints responded to within 10 days, although it's not our department, we do have a cross-cutting around customer experience. I'm just concerned that the Directorate of Place, I know that's the bulk of where things come from in terms of resolution of complaints or lower level complaints, that a quarter of the majority of the different departments listed in that weren't responded to in 10 days. It says that things are in place. I wouldn't mind a little bit more reassurance, because if you look at the whole customer experience and all the resources centrally for managing complaints and compliments and things, if one directorate needs more support from the corporate side to manage that, it would be useful for us to be able to reflect on that and to highlight that.
Yeah, I thought you might ask that question. I suppose I'll put it in context, really. In terms of our neighbouring local authorities that sit around us, Harrow, for example, Ealing, Hounslow. So Harrow, their stage 1 target is 15 working days, and at stage 2 they take 20 working days. Ealing, slightly longer. Ealing takes 20 working days and at stage 1 and 20 working days at stage 2. Hounslow are the same as Harrow, so they got 15 working days and 20 working days at stage 2. So I guess the question there is that for those areas such as planning, such as the areas where it needs a bit more in-depth inquiries, they do need a bit more time. So, for example, a planning complaint is not the same as a waste complaint. So if you look at the figures for waste, they can knock it out in 2, 3, 4 days in terms of response. But the planning requires a lot more thought and careful consideration in terms of providing a response. I think one of the things that maybe I need to work with Dan and the corporate management team is as to whether we've actually got the target right for all the areas, because we've just taken a sort of an approach across the whole organisation, say 10 working days, we're going to knock it out. But there are differences between them. Say, for example, children complaints, they take an awful long time to produce a proper detailed response. For me, the key is that I don't like to miss a target, because that, a complainant waiting for a response is expecting it on that day, and if they don't get it, it winds them up even more, and it's not ideal. But for me, it's the quality of the response. It's that quality of the response that deals with all the issues and provides them with a solution to whatever the issues are is key. So I think you are right, absolutely right, Councillor, that some of the areas did miss the target. And if you ask me, are they likely to miss those targets in the years to come, I think they probably are, because of the nature of their inquiries and the time that's needed. So that's something that more work that perhaps I need to do with senior managers in terms of how we address that sort of going forward.
Perhaps there's an additional or further aspect to information in there on the basis of what you've just said, because I suppose it's inevitable that some responses are going to be more detailed and take more time to get together. So having that, having some explanation about the nature of that. I mean, some things you're going to be able to respond to very quickly. But I think the other thing, of course, is rather like responses that councillors are able to do to residents. Very often, doing an immediate response, essentially saying, "Well, you've sent this in. We've got what you've sent. It'll take us a little while to." So, a kind of immediate response of acknowledgement. I don't know if that is what happens in terms of when you have those. So whether there's kind of like an acknowledgement, or whether it goes quiet for a while until there's a result, so that there appears to be nothing happening as far as the inquirer is concerned, or there's an immediate response to acknowledge what's happened.
Yes. What happens is, as soon as an inquiry comes in, we acknowledge receipt immediately, and then we tell them as to when they can expect a response. If we are going to miss that target, so if it's the 1st of June and we're going to miss that target, we then send them a further communication saying, "Look, I'm really sorry, but we're going to need a bit more time," and there's a further acknowledgement that goes saying. So they're always kept in the loop in terms of when a complaint response is expected. But I think the point that you make is right. Is someone expecting 10 working days, and if it's not delivered by that, then it's harder to deal with the inquiry. So the focus is very much to try and get it within that 10 working days. But we do acknowledge and then provide updates. I think the thing with the GOS system, though, the GOS complaint system, is because it's within the actual process, it's much easier to keep people updated, because they can actually check on their records as to what stages the complaint is at.
All right, Councillor Bridges.
Thank you, Chairman. If I can just focus a little bit on the ME system, which was recently introduced. I was just wondering what the feedback, if any, has been from elected members. We've seen on these stats quite a considerable drop. I appreciate there's a difference between service requests and members' inquiries. And service requests in particular, we've only gone up to as far as March, and we've missed off the next 5 months. So it would be good to see some more data on that, along with a breakdown of those service areas that have had service requests. But for me as an elected member personally, it's moving in the right direction to use a system and make it automated, but I do get frustrated at times with some of the requests that I put in that aren't tailored to the needs of me and myself or the residents, and I have provided feedback on a number of occasions to improve the service, particularly with sharing information with my ward colleagues. And I'm just, again, wondering what feedback you've had from members to date, and what actions have you taken to date to make the improvements necessary?
In terms of the period, I'm required to provide annual reports, so it goes from sort of April to March. That's the only reason it stops at that period of time. But I'm very happy to provide this committee or elected members with figures from April to the current period. That's fairly straightforward to do. I'm very happy to do that. In terms of the feedback that we've had, the feedback that we've had since January to the current time, I think we've come to this committee must be about 3 months ago and presented more information in terms of what's happening, and I think I'm due to come back here in some time in the next couple of months. So I'm very happy to provide that feedback in terms of the members' inquiry bit, because I think we said at that meeting that we would carry out a review or something after about 6 months, because it would then give a chance. I could go into that, but it would take quite a long time to go through the different bits of feedback. But maybe we should leave it to when I will return next time to provide you the feedback and update.
If I may, Chairman, as Ian has suggested, I think at a future date it would be worth looking into in more detail, because I do believe there are issues there, and I think it needs further scrutiny from elected members.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I think because it's so new. I mean, even now it's still relatively new, and I think there's probably a lot of different experiences from members in terms of their use of the system and expectation. And I know that there has been some feedback sent to you. I think I think we do need to. It's better to deal with these things at an earlier stage rather than a later one, or indeed allow it to drift. So that'll be a good stuff. Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Chair. This being my first time and having read this information, I found it very informative. But that also leads to a few questions that I have, if you may. First, I want to know where it says that people complain in person, by telephone, in writing, website, email. I just wanted to know if there was data to know how many people telephoned, how many emailed, and from which wards. So if there was any, say, gap in the system, we could plug it in and see what kind of ways people were using more and why. Another was, why do you think there were no stage 3 complaints? For some, I understand that stage 3 complaints are not needed, like child concerns and others, adult services. But for others, I didn't see any stage 3 complaints at all, like there was nothing. And then, are there any financial implications when a complaint goes to Ombudsman? And if so, what was that for the ones that have been dealt with? Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
I'm trying to remember what your first question was, Councillor. I'm really sorry. Would you mind giving...
No, I just wondered if there was a data on how the complaints were received and from where. Yeah. Thank you.
In terms of the system that we used before, the answer is that I couldn't break it down by ward. In terms of the whether it came in by telephone or by email or by or in writing, that can be done. So if you wanted that information, that can be provided. That's no difficulty. I would say to you the overwhelming number would be email. That's the way that it used to be communicated with. In terms of stage 3 complaints, my team handled three different complaints procedures. So you've got the corporate complaints procedure, you have the children's complaints procedure, and you have the adults and social care complaints procedure. I think in terms all three of those complaint processes operate in a slightly different way. Adult social care only has one stage 1, that's it. In terms of the children's complaints process, it touches into your financial implications bit, is that when we come to a stage, a children's complaint response, an officer from the council at the senior level will respond to that. But if it comes to a stage 2, I then have to commission 2 independent people to undertake an investigation. Each one of those investigations costs on average between £5,000 and £6,000 that the council has to pay for these independent people to undertake the investigation. Were it to go to stage 3, then each review would then take between £7,000 and £8,000. So there is for those complaints, there is a financial implication in the people that I commission. If you look at the figures for the stage 3 complaints in the last 6 or 7 years, we've had 2 stage 2 investigations during that period of time, but we've had just over 300 stage 1 investigations. So it relies on the skill of my team to actually try and resolve that. Because if you imagine a fraction of those 300 complaints, just say 10 of those or even 20 of those at £5,000 each, that's an awful lot of money the council is going to have to spend. So there is a financial implications of that. There is also financial implications for the Ombudsman as well, because the Ombudsman can find against us if we believe that we've made a mistake. But I think senior managers and officers within the council, there are many complaints that we've made a mistake, we hold our hands up, and we actually voluntarily pay compensation in terms of that to try and resolve it. But a lot of redress isn't financial, it's an apology. So if I've messed up and I've got it wrong, then I'll apologise to you for that, and we will try and put it right, whatever that is. Sometimes that doesn't involve any compensation. Mainly I'm thinking about the housing side of things. So for example, if we may have dealt with the housing application, we may have got the date wrong in terms of the priority date. Well, if that's the case, we apologise and we put it back to the date that it should be. Your other question about stage 3 complaints and why there are none or so few. This is primarily to do with the council's corporate complaints process, and this was reviewed by this committee. I think Councillor Bridges may well have chaired it. I think what it was is that there was a review conducted something like 6 years ago in terms of the process that we have in place to deal with corporate complaints. The decision was made that we would keep the 3 stages, but if at stage 1 the officer responded to it, and then at stage 2 they've responded to it, if you offer stage 3, it sometimes gives a complainant false hope that it might change by going to stage 3, when the reality is it's not going to change. And particularly when it comes to a homeless application, for example, where the social housing application policy is applied, as long as an officer has applied that policy correctly, the chances are you can go through stage 2, 3, 4, 5, it's not going to change. So the officers are applying that policy whereby if we've given an individual 2 responses at stages 1 and 2, the chances are it's not going to change at 3, so we offer them the Ombudsman direct, and that's why there's rarely any stage 3 investigations.
I think that also gets picked up in one of your comments about the fact that very often residents, if it's a resident who's raising the issue, it's not so much a complaint, it's more of a resolution that they're looking for, or some assistance. And I was kind of wondering where the dividing line, or how the dividing line is divined between sort of seeking assistance and a resolution as opposed to a complaint. Do you categorise it as a complaint when assistance is being sought in that way?
It is a judgment call, that, in terms of, and officers who look at that are experienced in terms of, I don't say we get it right every time, we do get it wrong sometimes, but I think sometimes when the system that operated before was that when you usually get an email where someone's saying my bin hasn't been collected, my rubbish hasn't been collected, we will always treat those as a sort of an informal type complaint where we just need to pass it on to waste services to get it sorted out. But then someone might say, well, actually, my waste hasn't been collected on 5 occasions. I've called you 5 times. You've still not sorted it out. You need to do something about it. We will treat that as a formal complaint. So it is a fine line, but it is a judgment call. We don't always get it right, but I think on the majority of times we do. And the thing I would say to you is, if you look at on page 10, and it's table 1, what you can see is there was 5,176 informal complaints, and you can see what the process is doing is that it goes from 5,000, and at stage 1 it goes to 816, and then it further reduces at stage 2 to 121, and then you got 46 at the Ombudsman. So the process is doing what it's designed to do. It's reducing the complaints as it goes along, because you've managed to resolve it at the stages.
This also goes back to an earlier point that I made about the observation around complexity and time taken, because we look at that table 1, the table at table 1, and we have that list of the directorates and the informal complaint numbers, which all look very happy, and then we suddenly get to place directorate and up it goes. Well, of course, the volume of items, as it were, and subject matter in place is extraordinary. So it's and also constitutes probably what might otherwise be expected to be the larger number of complaints. So I suppose, again, figures are good indicators, but it's what's behind them that's important, isn't it? So, again, a bit more in terms of the behind-the-scenes explanations might be of assistance, because at first blush, one might be saying, well, what's going wrong with that director? Well, probably nothing. It's more to do with across the board of its responsibilities and the nature of those things. Then it may be no better and no worse than you'd expect. All right, thank you, Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Chairman. So Ian and I have liaised quite a lot on the new Members' Inquiry Service Request process. So I think I've been working for Councillor Mills on a project with members of Dan's team sort of since March, April, trying to sort of come up with a long list of continuous improvement and things that can work. And I think there's a lot of sort of quick wins that hopefully we can kind of deliver. What I would say is the sort of more grittier feedback, the structural piece, is much more long term and harder to make happen. I think that what I take away from the new system is as much as it works, and I think I'm probably one of the higher adopters of using it, is it has been designed around how each department works or wants to work, rather than the user. And that probably you could say is similar to how the resident function of the website works as well, is that each department prefers to do things in a slightly different way, and that makes it really difficult for IT to then kind of get some commonality and consistency across the board. And I think that the shift that needs to happen over the next few years is to actually put the user at the heart of it and say, as a resident, as a councillor, what is the easiest way for you to be able to report something? And perhaps residents and councillors need to have slightly different views. So, one of my big frustrations is there can be up to 9 pages on a service request form. I think abandoned vehicles is the longest. I've been told that can't be brought down on any of the forms, which is disappointing. Some of the pages have just one sentence on them, which you probably need for a resident, but you don't really need that for a councillor. I put 25 in last weekend, and I had to look at the same data protection statement on every single one. And, it's a matter of seconds to click through, but I would imagine that these sort of barriers are kind of blocking the adoption amongst some councillors. We don't have the breakdown by ward or member. I don't know if that's too controversial to share in a pack, but it would be interesting maybe to speak to some of the councillors that haven't embraced it to see why. And is it just a fear of the system, or is it because actually when they try to use it, they find it too difficult? I mean, I think it's a good step forward. I was a relatively new member when I came in the email process, and I found it bizarre and inefficient and such a waste of time that we did things via email with so many different people trying to jump onto something. So it's a big leap forward compared to that. But I think there's a long way to go in terms of making it a really easy-to-use system that people want to embrace. There's a balance, I guess, because you don't want it too easy that you're inundated with people putting so many requests through. But that would be my request, is actually we need to try and put the user at the heart of it. Ultimately, maybe longer term with artificial intelligence, we'll be in a position where you can just hold your phone up at an overflowing bin. It knows exactly what it is. It knows exactly where it is. And just like that, it happens. But we're probably a few years away from that.
I'm very happy to come back to have a wider discussion in terms of that at the next meeting, whether that's. But yeah, but we have been working closely in terms of that.
All right, thank you, Councillor Bridges.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to focus on a more nicer note of the compliments. It is disappointing that the number's gone down, but just to really highlight the sterling work in repairs and maintenance team, and accounted for nearly 80% of the compliments received. I mean, that's landslide territory if it was a vote, and I was just wondering what exactly they're doing different. I know they're doing a very good job, but equally we've got other departments that are doing just as well. And I'm wondering if their follow-up and perhaps their process of returning and receiving feedback is a lot more thorough than perhaps other departments. Perhaps a bit more information around that and how we can copy those sort of stats with other departments would be good.
It's a twofold response, I suppose. In terms of repairs, they have made a concerted effort to make sure that every compliment that they receive is recorded, sent to the team, so it's recorded. And I can tell you that I was counting the figures before I actually came here. They've actually got more compliments at this point of the year than they did in the whole of last year. So their figure will be enormous next year, when it's presented next year. But I think the point that you make is right, is that there needs to be a wider comms from me across the whole, whether it's Dan or myself or whoever really, or perhaps even Tony, in terms of a wider piece about other services, making sure that they highlight where a compliment has been received. And I think some services are not as, maybe they're a bit more bashful in terms of coming forward and saying, actually I've had a compliment. So I think it's probably there that some services are better at that raising the profile of compliments than others. Some don't get many compliments, I have to say, though.
Thank you for that, Ian. If I may, I think it might be worth this committee actually noting those stats and congratulating the officers and the teams in those departments for a very good job. I know previously on previous committees over the years, repairs has been a very sort of sore subject, and it's very encouraging to see these stats going the other way.
That's been noted, and we will have that in the minutes. But it's a very good point, because there is, and traditionally I think, there's almost a reluctance to trumpet success in case anything goes wrong later and you sort of have it thrown back at you. But I think it's a very good point that all departments, when they do get compliments and when events have happened where they've been helpful and that's been acknowledged, that really ought to be something that is recorded somewhere and passed up the line. That of course, that's the other thing, of where those compliments come in and how they are recorded, and then where it goes from there, as it were. So the fact that it should go up the managerial line, certainly, so that, apart from anything else, so that managers and senior managers can see that what is being done is being appreciated. And but generally speaking, I suppose we're not that good at acknowledging that side of things for us, because we spend far more time, I suppose, trying to fix things that are being complained about. But it's the other side of the equation, and it's really important to do. All right, Councillor Batt.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ian, for this report. On the complaints section, it's promising to foresee that complaints are resolved at an earlier stage and from the informal stage before it goes into stage one. I note that with interest that you said that it's usually an apology that people are after rather than compensation. I'm just wondering to what extent mediation has been used, or conciliation has been used to achieve that, because I know that's a very effective tool to try and get to the root of a problem, and whether or not there's any data for that. The other question I had was in relation to, I know you've got statistics on ombudsman investigations. I was wondering if there's any data to show that if any of these complaints lead to any kind of litigation, and to what extent that litigation, how deep that litigation actually is. On the compliment side, I note that on Google reviews, London Borough of Hillingdon's at 2.4. I'm just wondering if you can translate our compliments to maybe allowing residents to promote their compliments on Google to increase our rating.
Right. In terms of mediation, it's not used that much in terms of trying to resolve it. I suppose that the only areas where that's more useful is in terms of the children's services side of things, trying to mediate in terms of those areas. But in all the other areas, mediation is rarely used in terms of by way of a resolution. It tends to be what happens is officers will go and speak to an individual, and between them and the manager's manager, they will try and work out what the best resolution to that is. I think from my perspective, in terms of observing the services, is we are open to challenge, and where there are errors where we've made it wrong, I think at senior manager level, it's always come down that you need to put it right, whatever that is. And often there are simple things, but it just means an effort that needs to be made to actually resolve it. And by going and speaking to someone, whether at their premises or on the phone, whichever, tends to do the trick from our experience. So in answer to your question about mediation, it isn't used that much at all across the council in terms of complaints. In terms of litigation, what tends to happen with litigation is that if there are ongoing litigation proceedings, we won't commence a complaint process, only because sometimes we may give information in the complaint side that might then cause a problem when it comes to litigation. So as soon as litigation is in place, we will withdraw the complaint and allow the litigation to proceed. The Ombudsman will take the same view, that if there's litigation in place, they won't investigate until the litigation's finished. The litigation tends to be, from my experience anyway, that from a complaints perspective and the service area, it tends to be in the repairs side of things where there are litigation ongoing, and we will withdraw children's services where there are issues going on by way of litigation, contact arrangements, usually those type of things, where we'll withdraw the complaint. So it's in those areas where there's litigation, we'll almost immediately withdraw. Where there is no litigation, of course, we will proceed with by way of the complaint. In terms of the Google review, with the new GOS system, what happens is when someone goes onto our website, they get the option of compliments or complaints, and when they're in the system, the first option actually is compliment, and then the second option is complaint. So they get the chance to offer us compliments as well as complaints. I have looked at the actual compliments that have come through the GOS system, and we have started to get a few. We don't get many, but we've started to get a few through that system, which is a good thing.
All right, thank you. Councillor Mathers.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't want us to lose the point that Ian made earlier around the quite blunt instrument of having fixed deadlines for every department. And I wondered if there was ways the committee of noting or asking officers or even Cabinet to consider, without overcomplicating the system, how there might be flexibility for officers to be given realistic and allow residents to have clear expectations set for those areas that need that bit more time. I personally agree with you in the sense of numbers can, without explanation, can be quite pointless, and I think there are definitely some departments that need more time because of the nature of what's coming through, not because there's necessarily a performance issue. And it would be easier to tell if there was a performance issue if the targets were a bit more bespoke and we were able to measure slightly different lengths of time. So I don't know how you want to do that, Chair, for your committee, but it would be, I think, useful not to miss that point, that there might need to be slight adaptation, because rigid systems sometimes work against us when we're trying to support.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes in an effort to, I don't mean this quite as pejorative as it sounds, but appear to be efficient, we kind of make a problem for ourselves. And certainly in other worlds, having interim stages of information just to keep people abreast of what's going on, even if it is, look, this is really complicated, we're going to need a realistic time frame to be able to deal with it, and that realistic time frame is, but understanding that you can't say 6 months or something, or maybe you can, but I mean, but only if it's needed. But to be setting targets is a good thing, but nevertheless, it's not a one size fits all. So it may be two things: one, a bit of information flow, but also having a more realistic, or potential for a more realistic target date setting. So that's certainly something that I think we could sort of pass on and pass upwards. Okay, all right. Yeah, if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, the only thing that you just to be aware about is there are the children's complaints procedure and the adults are set by statute, so we can't change those figures. But in terms of the corporate complaints, it tends to be a common approach across almost all local authorities at stage 1 and stage 2 and stage. They've just got these fixed numbers. I guess I've given you some figures for Harrow, Ealing, and Hounslow. They have slightly longer time. The danger with going with slightly longer time frame is that it applies to all the others as well. So, if waste services, if they can knock it out in 2 days, they might then extend to 10 days. So it's not as straightforward as that. But I'm happy to come back with a proposal if necessary, if that helps.
Well, I think it's certainly something that we should think about. Of course, the other side of the coin is that sometimes the longer you give people, the longer they'll take. So that's the other one. All right, Councillor Garg.
Yeah, sorry. On page 14 or page 8, I'm not sure which one you want to go by. The table 1 that Councillor Riley already sort of mentioned, the numbers are quite significant the way they've increased. So it says 34%, and it says the increase of informal complaints was in the repairs and maintenance areas due to the time taken. But it's a bit, I just wondered if you had any more information around that, because you're saying the compliments are coming from 80% of the compliments are also coming from that area. So have we fed back also how significantly the informal complaints have gone up in that area to those teams?
The strange thing is that someone who complains, and I've seen quite a few, also compliment the council when we sort out whatever that happens. Compliments are much harder to come by because there's nothing in it for someone to send a compliment. So to get a compliment is a real bonus for us. In terms of the actual volume of complaints, yes, there has been a significant increase. It is very much about providing times for appointments, times to get the work actually completed. It is very much in those areas, but sometimes it's a bit more basic than that. In that we're just better at recording it. Sometimes 1 year where you got people right on it, they're recording, therefore the figures will go up because someone's better at recording it. But in terms of the answer to the question, it is pretty much in those areas. In terms of the information that I've got, that it's either someone's not happy with the time they've had to wait in order to get an appointment for someone to go there, or just the time it's taken to get the work done. As much as it seems, it is in those two areas. But we also cover a large estate in terms of in terms of the properties that we have.
Sorry, so are we feeding that back to those departments that's the information that we're getting, the numbers are going up, and are they looking at that and saying, are we recording more, or is that information being passed back to them so that they can maybe look at it in more detail to see what is the actual cause? Is it because they're noting it more? Is it because, is there something that we can do to try and resolve this to bring them back down?
In terms of the service areas, what happens is that they have a spreadsheet in terms of where they record all the complaints that come through, and they will have a note of why the reasons as to why the actual person's complained. In terms of the actual inquiries themselves, they are constantly looking at that in terms of at their management meetings to determine what needs to be done, why has this happened. But sometimes, some years, you just have a spate of inquiries or complaints in that particular area that just inflates the number in terms of that. So in terms of repairs, for example, it tends to be cyclical. So during the winter months, people are complaining about the coldness, the heating not working. During the spring, it's about leaks in their property because it's raining. During the summer, it's just they're saying they don't want to keep the windows open, and therefore it's causing issues about damp and mould in property. So it tends to be sort of cyclical in terms of the way that works.
All right, thank you, Councillor Bridges. Just a final comment before we wrap this one up, if you like.
Perhaps a follow-on then from Councillor Garg, in that the number of complaints and compliments may also be the fact that perhaps the number of jobs are still quite backlogged from the pandemic. The number of jobs may be significantly higher compared to previous years. I don't have that information to hand, but perhaps Dan might be able to concur with that, but it's just an observation on my part.
Yeah, there is an element of that, and I mean, Dan's very welcome to comment. There is an element of that in that because of the pandemic, there were quite a number of jobs that couldn't be undertaken. We also had the issue about even though if the jobs could be undertaken, the material wasn't there for the work to be undertaken. Fencing comes to mind, the actual bricks that's needed to do the work. What then happened is the contractors that we have and the officers that we have there's more and more work for them to actually deal with, and therefore it takes longer for them to actually process it. So you are right in that respect. So whilst the appointments might go further back, there are lots of other reasons that sit around it that's made it take longer to undertake the work. Fencing has been a big issue in terms of getting the material to do that, and of course the materials for properties just aren't there, so that they have caused issues in terms of those.
I mean, in other spheres we've heard about all sorts of other issues that have impacted on getting things done, and it starts, I think, with the pandemic, and whatever kind of natural waiting lists were happening before then, they were exacerbated by the pandemic, and then we've had inflation, so it's been problem upon problem. All right, look, I'm going to draw this one to a close at this stage. Ian, as ever, fascinating, and thank you very much, and we look forward to you coming back and having a longer and greater discussion. I don't know if Dan wanted to chip in on anything, but if not, you're happy with all those things. All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Ian. Okay, item 6. Budget planning report for services within the remit of the committee. And we have Andy, and we don't have Marie, obviously. Even I can tell Chris isn't Marie. But good to see you. So, again, we could spend a whole meeting on this, and it's a packed agenda tonight. But and it may be that the committee would think it would be a good idea to have a bit more of an in-depth, or at least longer time with our finance officers. But again, going through the paper and agenda item 6. I don't know if Andy's going to start or Chris is going to start. Okay, Andy's going to start. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to start off with discussing the process in terms of the budget build and then take you through the details in the report, focusing on the headlines in that report. So this is the first meeting that Finance attend in terms of the new budget cycle. So we'll be updating the committee today on the current challenges and the work underway to prepare the consultation budget that will be presented to December Cabinet. We'll then come back to the committee in January next year and discuss the position presented in that consultation budget and present the specific proposals within the remit of the committee for consideration and discussion. The feedback from this committee will then be included in the budget report, which will be presented to February Cabinet, where Cabinet will be asked to approve the proposals to full Council. So in terms of the Council's revenue monitoring position, so at the moment we are forecasting an underspend of 23,000, with the services within the remit of this committee underspending by 900,000, thanks to 600,000 within the finance portfolio, which is being driven by a reduction in the Council's energy requirement, and a further 300,000 within corporate services, which is being driven by a number of minor staffing underspends and additional income across the portfolio. Within these services, there are £1.6 million worth of savings to be delivered in 23-24, with the majority of this being recorded as either banked or in progress. The 595k savings which are recorded at Amber include 356k, which is being driven by the business service review, where a zero-based review has been undertaken and a new operational model is currently in discussion, and a further 171k related to additional income, which is being reported at Amber whilst we monitor the impacts of the uplift on demand and the recovery from the pandemic on the income streams for the Council. In terms of the medium-term financial forecast, in February 2023, the Council's saving requirement 27-28 was estimated to be 55.4 million, with the single largest driving factor behind this being the exceptional inflation that we've seen both globally and nationally, adding £60 million to the budget gap. Within the remit of this committee, 5 million of that is being driven by energy and fuel, with other areas inflation including workforce and contracted inflation. Service pressures are forecast to add £23 million, which is predominantly from the impact of demographic growth across the borough. 90k of this sits within the remit of this committee, which relates to the council looking to boost cyber security. Finally, corporate items are adding just under £12 million to the budget gap, with 6.5 million of this being driven by the council's borrowing requirement for the capital programme, with this being the element that sits within the remit of this committee. The remaining balance is predominantly TfL concessionary fares, which are managed through, which relates to the recovery from the pandemic since due to travel numbers for the over 65s. Over the next few months in the build-up to December Cabinet, we're going to continue working on assessing the budget gap, with inflation remaining stubbornly high and demand pressures linked to cost of living crisis impacting on the council. Alongside this, we'll be exploring ways to reduce the council's expenditure, looking to drive efficiency gains whilst protecting frontline services and using the council's transformation process to formulate budget proposals that will be presented back to this committee in January next year. Thank you, Chair.
There are quite a number of costs to this particular council that are unique to us. Issues around Heathrow, for example, and requirements to look after people that have come in through Heathrow, let alone children and so forth. And observations were made today in the press about the extent to which local authorities' capacity to generate income and generate money is relatively limited. And you make the point in the report that even council tax and fees and charges are a very tiny proportion of the amount of money that we have to spend. A great deal of the pressures, clearly, are still coming from the sort of wave effect of COVID, but more especially the immediate impact of high inflation. And I think that's very difficult to underestimate, or indeed is something that does need to be taken account of very much when looking at all of this, because it's certainly over the preceding many years, it's not. We haven't had this economic situation for a very long time impacting on how we do business. So what we haven't had is any sort of, I don't even want to call it compensation, any sort of catch-up from national governments over the years in order to help local authorities do what we need to do, let alone the additional pressures that we've got. So I think those are important issues to bear in mind when we're looking at what we are. As I said before, we could probably spend an entire meeting on this report, but it's useful to see, as far as this committee is concerned, obviously where we are, and the fact that we are, broadly speaking, quite a good place. Set against those pressures and difficulties is a great credit to the Finance Directorate and everything that you guys do. What do you think are the major pieces of work that we need to be concerned about going forward in terms of making sure that that the finance ship is pretty steady?
Thank you, Chair. So at the moment, the government settlement, as you say, hasn't been reopened, so there's no offer of additional grant funding at the moment to compensate us for the additional inflation that we've had to pay out over the last few years. The government settlement currently runs to the end of 24-25, so from 25-26 onwards, we're still unclear as to how much funding we're likely to receive. This is a position across all local authorities nationally, so I think that's one of our kind of key risk areas that we have flagged for in the Council's MTFF report that went to February Cabinet. Clearly we've seen in the press lately some local authorities are struggling, and there's an estimated 5 billion gap across the sector over the medium term. So at the moment, I think what we need to see is what that 25-26 funding settlement is going to look like. So we're just carrying a lot of uncertainty from that year onwards in the MTFF at the moment. In terms of what we need to be focusing on in the kind of short to medium term, as you say, inflation's running stubbornly high, so it's the highest it's been for about 40 years. That's clearly having a big impact on us. The pay award is unfunded, so although that's negotiated nationally, that leads to an additional cost for the borough. So we need to make sure that basically our MTFF and our budget strategy is a low-risk strategy, so that we're building in inflation assumptions, demographic growth assumptions into the strategy, so that we know that we can afford to fund those going forward. And if you look at our levels of reserves, they are within the range that we've set and through the February Cabinet position, and in line with the reserves that is set by the Section 151 officer, Director of Finance, and we're running several million above that level at the moment. But clearly there are challenges going forward. Chris, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Chris, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So, yeah, from my perspective, it is the demand-led pressures that we've got, particularly in the adults and children's portfolios. Inflation, I mean, it's the single largest, pressure in the MTFF, so it's adding £60 million, which is largely unfunded. So we've got a significant transformation programme now that's, we've got £21 million worth of savings this year that's going to be delivered, a further material level next year. So we're ramping up the savings delivery to mitigate the inflationary pressures.
Just in simple terms, because we obviously have all the language and terminology of the report, and we talk about the effects of inflation, but in relatively simple terms, and what you've just said about those areas where the pressures are ever more difficult, and I'll come back to the sort of cyclical problem. What we're talking about is an increasing cost for the provision of services, or for the services that we buy in or spend on. So others have had to put their costs up in order to meet their requirements and so forth. If we're buying specialist services, or if we're paying for specialist services for particular vulnerable groups, that is, I think, the basic, and if I get this wrong, tell me, because there's every possibility I will, but we are paying considerably more for the same service as we were previously now, and that's costing us more. Is that essentially what's happening?
Yeah, no, that's correct, Chair, and there is a robust process in place where we are challenging, so we will get providers that come to us and request an inflationary uplift. So we do challenge that, we ask for a full breakdown, but that in its simplest terms is the position that we're in at the minute.
And of course the problem with that is that the money that we get as a local authority hasn't almost inevitably kept pace with those rising costs. That's really the vicious circle, isn't it?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I mean, we are, where we do have longer term contracts, we are protected a little bit from inflationary uplifts where they're fixed costs. But in a number of our contracts and placements spend, we build in inflationary uplifts as part of the contract, which are effectively unfunded.
Because it's certainly something that we went into when we dealt with procurement and still are dealing with our procurement project, that part of the equation is being able to negotiate with our customers and with those who we contract with in order to, A, keep them on board so that the things that we want to be done are done, but equally to spread the responsibility and the financial load over maybe a longer period of time, on the basis that the forecasts are that inflation's going to come down. I mean, I heard the other day, rapidly in the next 2 or 3 years. Well, yeah, but that's okay. But we need to live for where we are now. That's the problem. All right, and of course the other one, in terms of the vicious circle, is that inevitably, on the cost of living crisis, that the inputs of pay requirements or pay inflation go up, and trying to balance that set against the spend is again a complexity. All right. Any other questions, Councillor Mathers?
Thank you, Chair. As always, massive thanks to the finance team and others involved in this. I know these processes aren't easy, and in challenging times, which we've had for many years, particularly with the core grant being reduced significantly over the last 15, 13 years or whatever it might be, and we're still in a place where it's not really keeping up, and sadly local authority budgets are the kind of poor cousin of national financing of different departments, although I'm sure some departments wouldn't agree with that right now. But there is a desperate need to see more local government funding, and we thankfully note some of the changes to social care. I forget which one it is that's going to hopefully restructure some of the growth demand we've seen that has been a particular pressure around adult social care, I believe. But I am concerned about the report, in that we have a 7-page report. We are the finance committee, as it were, when it comes to scrutiny. And what I would like to see, I believe, is more of a general picture with some of the detail of the departments, not to comment on individual departments, but if there are some departments that are overspending or underspending in significant ways beyond just a table, with explanation we're able to understand, well, what might the impact be on the wider council's finances and its viability. Obviously we have to deliver a balanced budget, and I know there'll be continuous exchanges going on. But there's no information here about the capital programme. There will have been some changes to that. We know that there's a supplier of a construction in the borough that could be at risk, that could add costs to borrowing or changes to that project. I know it's small in the scheme of the wider capital scheme. The impact of interest rates, the impact of things that may have moved and changed since the budget was set in February, and I would like to see more of that. Not that we can scrutinise and critique individual departments, but to get a fuller understanding of the interchange and the process and the thinking of the finance team in making sure that there's a whole council approach to getting a balanced budget, not just our small bit, whereas other committees can focus on the detail of their departments. I'm not saying that the report is lacking and I really appreciate the strategy to look at the budget gap and the new and emerging risks sections, because that shows the true picture. That extends beyond the mid-term financial plan, showing the 10 million gap that we're struggling with and other potential risks ahead. I would love to question, though, the rationale around the rates anticipated for inflation. So we've seen that, as you said, stubborn is probably an optimistic word almost with inflation. And if you, through other committees that some of us are on, you can see that there's huge volatility in inflation. And the Bank of England is set a target. Government has struggled to help them achieve that, or which way round you want to blame it, the bank or the guy, it doesn't bother me, but it's stubbornly high. To think that by the end of 24 it would go down to 3% for me seems highly unrealistic. I suspect we'll see higher sustained interest rates, although that won't have an impact necessarily on us because of our borrowing rates being lower. It will have an impact on procurement contracts where companies' viability might change if they're renting large places and they have to do inflation-linked rentals, and lots of complicated things there. And it is fortunate when we're able to not increase inflation on contracts for us, but that also puts massive risk on, and the procurement team has told us hugely about this balance with new tenders, but even existing contracts, and pressure on officers to ensure that the viability of that company maintains itself. Because if, as we see at the moment, the loss of the viability of a company has a massive impact on our local community, whether it be capital or revenue. And so sometimes I suppose our hand is forced in that sense. So I think for me, inflation is one that we probably need more understanding on how the calculations came through. I think it would be, I am not an accountant, you guys are much better at this, but to understand as a committee the rationale and the calculation, even if it's part 2, just to understand the rationale, the different advisors that you may be getting, or the calculations you may be doing, on the assumptions that are being made, so that we can help from a layman's perspective. Apologies if there are any qualified amongst us, but to give a little bit of insight of our concerns within this, because if we don't get inflation right in our anticipations ahead, it undermines the whole budget. I equally worry, and I won't lament on this too much, around the savings gap. A lot of unidentified savings. I know that needs to come from departments and cabinet and other places. But for me, when we are probably closer to the lower limit of our general reserves than I think I've ever seen us, I know the limit went up recently to take on that extra risk, and I do understand there are earmarked reserves, which thankfully for a windfall from the Waste Authority we've been able to maintain those. But being that close, even though it's several million above, still being that close to the line, I am concerned that when there's a gap that would dwarf that and take us under the limit, that there isn't more conversation around. This seems like business as usual when it comes to strategy to deal with budget gap for the council, and we're asking for another saving, which is half of what we're asking of this year. Again, and actually with the savings programs, it's always front loaded, so it's a big amount and it decreases. Well, with this new need for inflation, it doesn't. It almost keeps it the same for a bit, and that really concerns me, because it may mean that we see an unsustainable impact on our services quality, and that obviously can lead to the previous item. There may be unintended costs for council services, so if we hold the vacancy rate above what we currently are, which I don't know if that's partly probably by design, but also it's there because maybe some other recruitment bits we don't know. But if we keep having high vacancy rates in certain services, the cost to us later down the line may be more. And I don't think we need to sit in the bar room and spend ages analysing that. But there might be some, actually, if this remains a higher vacancy level in these areas for this amount of time, it's not cost saving anymore. And so it'd be useful to find out kind of how those rationales are made and what other checks and balances the council uses within its budget framework. A bit more explanation to go, this is how we manage long-term costs in the mid-term financial plan when it comes to those kind of control measures, because it seems like the bottom line is pretty much being maintained by vacancy rates. I'm happy to be wrong with that. I'd love to hear more about how the government is being lobbied, not necessarily politically, but just like what departments are pushing for, what grants the council are going, how successful there's been, because that shows a financial modelling for me that there isn't just, it's almost income generating. I know we've seen fees go up and things like that, but actually if there are government grants coming and we know they're in the pipeline, or there's murmurs about them, like how much resource do we have to chase them, because they just take the pressure off. So I guess my request is, and my question is, maybe not for now, but could be for another time, is more information to get a bit of an understanding of what's being done differently from the normal budget strategy to deal with budget gaps, and how do you come to some of these assumptions when it comes to, if you had a crystal ball with inflation, great, but you don't, so what external support is there, what internal expertise is there, just some of those functions that help us to understand some of the dynamics, so we know that our finance team, who are brilliant, are well resourced with this incredible challenge. And I think that's my, sorry, that was more of a rant than a question, but I'd like us to understand the thinking behind this report, because I think we have a duty to make sure that the council is as equipped as possible to manage, as you've said, an extremely difficult time.
Quite a lot of questions.
I'll try and provide some feedback for you, but I was happy to have further conversations and expand on anything. But in terms of the inflation, which seemed to be one of the key points I took from what you were saying, we do look at a various range of inflation forecasts. We have our own Treasury advisors, and then we also have obviously access to all external data and also other partners that we work with in terms of gaining financial data. If you look at the last government presentation, I think it was in August, they submitted the OBR projections. They also had city projections, outer city projections, and Bank of England projections. So, and there are quite a large range between some of those upper limits and lower limits, depending on the organisations The averages at the moment for 2023 across all of the industries was 7%, and that's forecast to reduce to 3%, as you say, for 2024. Yes, I appreciate it does feel quite optimistic at the moment. So we are working also with our procurement team, so we're also not only looking at the national picture, we look at the local picture. In the report that went to Cabinet in February, there was a chart that kind of showed how we're forecasting inflation, but also then how that translates into service delivery. Because what we do tend to see is that the inflationary impact on the council services tends to run slightly behind. So when providers present, they normally say, well, I've had an 8% service cost increase over the last year. So even if the inflation is below that, we're kind of funding almost on a 1 year lag as we work through those negotiations. But as Chris pointed out, we do have some long-term contracts. And as you said, we've also got duty of care, looking after our providers, making sure they're financially sustainable, particularly with social care providers. So with the Care Act in 2014, we took on additional legal duties to ensure providers' sustainability. The way we approach this, as you say, the reserves are relatively low, but what we do is we go with a low-risk budget strategy. So we look at those range of inflation rates. We try to peg it at something which looks realistic and not overly optimistic. And then by doing that, we can assess the budget gap on a low-risk basis. So when we then come up with our saving program that closes that gap off, it should hopefully be a low-risk budget strategy which ensures that in years 1 and 2, we're looking like we've got a balanced budget. And whilst the overall saving requirement is quite significant at 55 million, the net budget gap reported in February Cabinet was just over 9 million. So we have been working to chip away at this. So this isn't something that's new that's just come up. We've been working through the pandemic for a number of years, and then the exceptional inflation environment for a number of years. So we are looking at a kind of pessimistic economic environment at the moment. But hopefully it's going to improve, and some of the projections do suggest inflation is going to drop to 3% next year. As you say, it does look like it could be optimistic, but these are the experts. And then we just need to see what the government are going to do with our funding from 25-26 onwards, which could help to close off some of that gap, and maybe they'll address some of the inflationary pressures that the sector's been facing over the last few years.
I think that, again, this ties in quite a bit with the procurement side, doesn't it? Because sort of procurement contractual husbandry, and if anybody watching wants to pick that one up, that's a free one from us, as an expression. It's difficult because being able to forecast the resilience of those with whom we contract or to be in any way certain about it is very difficult, because it's not just us. It's the whole way in which individual companies and organisations behave themselves and deal with their own issues in terms of how they operate. The extent to which the council is able to help with resilience or to ensure resilience is probably relatively limited, but at the same time it is something we look at when we do procurement, when we investigate and let contracts. And I know it's a big part of the conversation that is had between procurement and those with whom we deal. But I can't help but think it's a fairly complicated equation to be able to be certain about, because clearly things happen very quickly as time goes on, as we've seen from various companies around the country. And it's not by any means an exact science. And we've heard from Matthew on procurement how essentially we do as much as we can to build in safety nets as far as that's concerned. All right. Well, look, I think for the moment... Oh, sorry. Okay. Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Chair, for indulging me one more time. I just wanted to reflect on what Councillor Mather said and understand, like for a layperson, efficiency savings are basically making cuts. If that's not the case, is there an audit to see how efficiency savings are in any way affecting the services and the delivery of services? And if it is, then how are we looking? I think especially like HR or some other places where we are making those savings. So is there an audit where we know what are the services that have been really, has there been an effect in any way? Or if there is there an audit of the same? Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. So I wouldn't say that we are making cuts to services. So we are looking at ways of doing things more efficiently. So technology is a good example of that, where we can maximise technology. So over the last few years within the finance department, for example, we've introduced new financial systems, and that's enabled us to work more efficiently, more effectively, and therefore be able to drive out efficiencies in processes. We always look to put those efficiencies into the back office functions, so within the services actually within the remit of this committee, so that we're able to then protect the frontline services through the council's budget strategy. In terms of an audit, I can't think of there isn't a particular report that I'm aware of that kind of really sets this out. I guess in terms of what Ian presented tonight, we've looked at how the kind of complaints and compliments processes has moved over time. But in terms of the way the council approaches its budget strategies, we work with corporate directors, we have our MTFF strategy sessions, and we work out what we think the council needs in order to deliver those frontline services. And that then forms part of the budget gap analysis that we then feed back into the budget strategy. So we're not trying to reduce the services, that we actually work with those services and say, what it is that you actually need. So in the strategy, you'll see a section called demand-led growth. So we're working with social care colleagues, homelessness, waste services, and forecasting how much money we feel they need to run those services, and then going back and saying, okay, this is now the gap. How do we go about delivering that? So I don't think that our budget strategy is targeting cuts as such. It is about driving that back-end efficiency and process-driven approach.
Thank you, Chair. It's good to know. Thanks.
Mr. Kennedy.
Just to really echo very much what Andy just said there, is that our drive is on improving services to our residents. I mean, obviously we've heard this evening from an earlier report around compliments and complaints. We receive a significant number of compliments about the services we provide. We benchmark with many other local authorities across London, and we've got some really quite outstanding services compared to other boroughs. So in terms of a value for money point, rather than sort of cost, we've got good value for money, and we measure that independently. And the drive, I mean, just to illustrate the point, we've talked about technology. Andy mentioned technology and back office and lean. We've talked about the move from email to GOS and other systems. Whilst it's not perfect and exactly where we want, we are on a journey, and it's continuing to improve. So we've got different ways of using the technology, and our customers want that now. That's the modern way of working. I think the other kind of point I did want to emphasise as well, and just touching on something Andy said, was those demand-led services. So it is applying a consistent model of prevention and early intervention throughout our services, so that we don't see need escalating and therefore require a higher cost response when it does present. And actually just being very smart with different models of working, different practices, and being, working with Susie and the team, thinking about, instead of, what can we do to avoid agency staff where that's appropriate to do so, and having creative and tenacious recruitment campaigns with using apprentices and different ways of working. So actually it's about being smart with our ways of working to secure the best value. So I think it's certainly I wouldn't want to leave this committee with we're focusing on cuts to balance the budget. It's absolutely nice about being smart, being proactive, and exactly as Andy has said, is protecting the frontline services that our residents value.
I suppose that sort of also generates a wider question about how individual departments do things, how they undertake their work, and the extent to which they are encouraged to look at the areas of their own operation as to how, and not just what they do, but how the external forces on what they do can better be managed. Because sometimes savings are not just savings on in any way on reduction of anything. It's looking at better ways of doing things at each end of the continuum of whatever you're doing. So if the process at the beginning, as it were, can be done differently and in a better, more efficient way, providing a better service at that stage, so that, and I'm not saying this is the case, but so that what we're not doing is always having to react at the more expensive end in order to prevent something we should have been looking at much earlier on. So because all these departments have great expertise in their own area. So I suppose my question or comment is, to what extent are especially the bigger spending departments, as we know them to be, are they able to have the time, and goodness knows, they're busy as heck anyway, but have the time to look at their own operations and services and be able to say to finance, well, look, if we were able to do this bit differently, that would give us a saving, or it would allow us to do this more costly bit better, and it wouldn't be as costly because we've done good planning at that stage. I don't know if any of that makes any sense, but having that input from the experts in the departments, sending ideas up to you guys to be able to say, well, if we did this, then this would be the financial beneficial outcome, even if it's just spreading what they spend in better ways and different ways. Is that a kind of aspect of resilience that we've got? In other words, different departments being able to contribute to the overall picture.
Yeah, so there was, clearly with the level of savings that we've got in the MTFF for this year, there was a big push to really get good engagement from budget managers, heads of service, being driven by corporate directors. So there's a real drive for the transformation programme, and we are embedding that within finance, so we're having regular monthly meetings with all budget managers and heads of service, where we are asking them to consider new ways of working, different ways of working, using technology better, more efficiently, to achieve the same and better results. So everybody is now aware of the financial position which we are in and the level of savings that's needed, and new ways of working are being considered all the time.
Dan.
And just to illustrate that point with an example, we are at the corporate management team with Tony Zaman, our chief exec, looking at all different ways of working. And I suppose one example that illustrates this for me is over the last year, where we've looked at new technology, AWS Connect technology, to transform our initial point of contact, and that's been applied to a whole range of different services, including social care, waste services, housing, etc. It hasn't been limited to one service area, and actually it's been embraced very positively by our residents as a means for much more convenient communication. And actually the next phase now is seeing how we can seek, I suppose, digital fulfilment end to end without there needing any handoffs between the middle people, so to speak. So the service areas at the end, and it just moves straight through, particularly transactional kind of contacts, that goes straight through to the service areas, and it gets whatever it is that's required gets programmed and actioned. So that's a common approach, technology platform that's been applied to all service areas.
All right. Look, thank you very much. As I say, we could talk about this all night, but it's also something for us to take away and digest. And if any members want to raise issues or highlight matters, then obviously ping them through to me, and we'll take them forward with the team, because I have regular meetings anyway. So that's all right. But for now, thank you very much indeed. That's great. All right. What we'll do now is, because I think it makes sense, is to take items 7 and 9 together, because there's a bit of synergy going on here. So we'll deal with staff skills, learning and development, which is item 7. But it's sort of tied in really with the policy review discussion and guidance. So we'll come on to that once we have heard from Susie, who sat there very patiently listening to all this. But a lot of it is connected, as ever with this committee, I think, because certainly what you highlight in your paper does have an impact inevitably on both the sort of complaints and MEs and all the rest of its side, and also the way that operates, if you like, because the way in which we deal with, handle and develop our staff, and indeed retain and recruit, which is something I want to come on to as part and parcel of an idea we've had as a committee for our next major project. It kind of all interlinks, I think, in perhaps bigger ways than people do imagine. So your highlights from your paper.
Thank you. So first of all, talent is a key pillar to our HR strategy, which allows us to deliver our services to our residents. Firstly, we need to identify what our current talent is and what we need for the future, and that's really important, making sure that we don't just focus on what we have right now. We need to look about what we need for the future. Through understanding what we need for the future, this will help us inform our talent development offerings to our employees. Our talent develop offering is not only key for future talent needs and to address skill shortages, but it's also a key retention technique, and how we induct our employees especially will have an impact on their longevity in the role and with the council. We've recently relaunched our induction programme, which features a face-to-face session and has visibility of Tony as the CEO and our corporate directors, so people actually get to see the senior management of the council. This does form a small part of equipping our new team members with the tools to do their job. They also have online mandatory training, because there is always online or mandatory training more specifically for every role. And there is also service-specific induction as well. Throughout LBH, or an employee's time at LBH, there was also performance management, and this is not always a negative aspect. People hear performance management and think it's because you're failing. That's not what it means. It's around giving people objectives and something to aim for, and it allows us to identify the training needs for employees and to meet the needs of the roles going forward. One of our exciting parts is our early careers offering, and it's fast becoming a highlight of our talent team. The range of apprenticeships that we have on offer for new employees, but also for existing employees. So again, a really important thing around apprenticeships is they're not just for new employees coming in. Anybody within the council can actually look at doing apprenticeships, and we need to make sure that we utilise those. So part of our apprenticeships as well is looking at our management and leadership training, and ensuring that our managers have the skills for today but also for the future, and that they have the skills that are needed. As I said, talent is pivotal for us to build for the present and for the future. We need to know who our top talent are and succession plan for critical roles. Effective talent development also allows us to ensure that our workforce and leadership are diverse, which is shown to have a link to improved performance, decision making and effectiveness. Continuing our theme of digital by default, Learning Zone is our learning management system. This not only tracks learning but also offers a suite of free online courses to employees which they can complete at any time, usually on any device that works for them. And finally, our talent offering needs to be inclusive. Everyone needs to have the opportunity to grow in their role, and we need to make sure that our talent offering is diverse to be able to meet their needs. We will also continue with our early careers support to support vulnerable people into paid employment.
All right, thank you. As I say, if we members join this with item 9, which is our discussion on our future reviews, because we've already said on a number of occasions that we think HR, staffing, recruitment and retention is the next one, that is the next big thing that we'd quite like to look at. Councillor Mathers.
I think there are other areas that have been asked to be considered, such as customer services, which was also been mentioned several times, which by taking these items together, we're not allowing a full opportunity to assess all of them, but assume it's item 7. I'm not taking away from that, but as said with the scorecard, there is already plans in place, and part of the scorecard talks about not duplicating review and necessarily duplicating what the officers and others are doing. So it would feel a bit like the procurement review, which has national guidance coming in, which means that the whole thing could be tipped upside down. I wouldn't want us to preempt changes that have already been planned or are in train to be implemented. It may be best to review after those things to see how effective they are, a bit similar to how we've done with GOS.
Yeah, but at the same time, it may be more beneficial for us to understand more fully what those what those changes are going to look like in order to look at the sort of the whole picture. I think we're particularly interested in what has just been said in terms of identification of the right people in the right places, and what is needed and what we need for now and for the future. And I suppose under that kind of umbrella of HR resources and making sure we've got the right approach to the right skills in the right places is something that we really need to be looking at. The customer experience perhaps inevitably flows from that as a consequence of the insurance that we've got the right people in the right places, but also again picking up on some of the things in the report, the development of staff and the opportunity for people to develop not just in the area they're in, but also have the opportunity to see if there's a kind of crossover between different disciplines that they might want to get involved in. And because sometimes that is what's going to happen, isn't it? That an opportunity might arise in another department that somebody in another department is looking at. And it's not always going to be the case that we're going to get people from outside. There's then the whole issue about agency or people who come in on short-term contracts and so forth and things like that, set against long-term staff who are embedded in the organisation, in the council. So I think there's a whole bunch of areas that would do well for us to look into as a piece of work. And if there is this additional review going on and recommendation, then it'd be quite useful to understand where that is and what it's saying at this sort of stage, so that we can bring those two together. Because notwithstanding that that review will deal with whatever it will deal with, there'll be other issues that come in and impact on that. And it may be that getting an overview will also highlight particular areas that senior officers are more concerned about, that we can drill down into during the course of that. So I really do think that this is an area that we need to get fairly early understanding of, and then be able to perhaps, as I say, look at specific areas which we can then take forward, given the breadth of our responsibilities. Any comments? Good. Oh, right, Councillor Burt.
Thank you, Chair. Susie, thanks for the report. Just a couple of questions on this. First was in terms of the training that's provided on the platform. I'm wondering to what extent that's sort of internal in-house training, and to what extent that's we look at procuring other providers, because I know that there are some excellent providers out there that also provide assessments, so we can see and monitor performance. I know a lot of people watch videos online, but then there's like a sort of a test after it. I'm wondering if that's been used. The second question was around secondments, because secondments are a great way to develop staff, and I'm wondering if we looked at secondments for organisations perhaps that we work quite closely with, or even perhaps seconding to other local authorities to learn from them. So I'm just wondering if that's a thought that's been considered.
Thank you. So taking the first question around Learning Zone, our LMS system, the system of the courses that are on there are sort of off-the-shelf, generic courses that people can dip in and out of. There aren't sort of a test at the end, but we are working on the upgrade that we're currently going through at the moment. Will allow us to put more bespoke courses on there that are things that we might have developed ourselves, which can include a test at the end. I think one of the things that's really important is there are so many different ways that people learn, and there's so many different resources, because actually things like TED Talks are really, really informative and really powerful. So it's making sure that we have access to those on the system as well. As I say, it is going through an upgrade at the moment, which allows us more functionality, but the testing piece is actually a really valid point, and I will look to see if there's certain bits of that, the testing that we can get in there as well. So thank you for that one. In terms of secondments, so we do a lot of internal secondments, and they are really beneficial. We have also potentially broached doing secondments internally with other councils, specifically London councils, which seems to be a relatively easy thing to do. We haven't actually done one yet, but I'm led to believe that we can do that, and that's relatively easy. I think when we look outside of other boroughs and local councils, we might be challenged somewhat. So if we were looking to look at the charity sector or even private sector, there could be challenges around employment rights around that. So I'd need to look into sort of external secondments further, but certainly internal ones and ones within local government, we absolutely can do that. Thanks.
I don't know if you indicated, Councillor Bridges, or whether you were just agreeing with something that was which is
probably both.
Not impossible.
Okay, I will, without ignoring agenda item 7, it was a very good report, by the way, on agenda item 9 in terms of the topic review. I appreciate this wasn't listed on the back of the report for a potential item to look at, but it's something I think might be worth looking into. I believe it is the remit of this committee, and that is around first aid training. We're currently sat in Committee Room 5, which is a very public-focused room, indeed, with Committee Room 6, both hold licensing meetings, planning meetings, and indeed our own meeting. Apart from the first aid sign I see to contact security, which time is of course of the essence, I see no first aid kit, no defibrillators, and I would just think there might be an opportunity to look at that along with the training opportunities we offer both staff and councillors in our public-facing roles, to see if we have adequate training available, and if there's the potential to explore it further and open it up to more people to enrol on these life-saving and essential tools.
I suppose that, again, coming back to Susie's paper and indeed her remit, it's an interesting one in terms of the public-facing side, and also the extent of, even as we are, the number of people that are in this building, that work in this building, and some of the officers will spend a lot of their time out and about on various aspects of their work, and the extent to which they would be or could be equipped to do things. I can see that sometimes there would be maybe concerns around the extent to which they could get involved, but no more and no less in some ways than the rest of the public in a sense, but that their training could be, or training that we could undertake as far as first aid and understanding of conditions and so forth, would be of benefit. So is that something that, I know it may not be, as it were, the most important thing, but it's certainly something that's of significant interest. Is that something that is trained on or thought about? There's probably some sort of first aid officer in every department, but that very often tends to be a bit of a mixed bag in terms of responsibility.
Yeah, so there are, we absolutely do first aid training, and there is a certain requirement within the building that we need to make sure from a health and safety perspective that we have a certain number of first aiders. There are certain roles that will require first aid training, but I think actually reflecting on what you said, we probably only train where it's mandatory within the role. It's probably not something that we actually offer out to people to be able to have those skills. And it's actually a really important piece because there's a big campaign by St John Ambulance a couple of years ago about those life-saving skills that you can have. The one thing that actually we are really good at doing a lot of training around is mental health first aid. We have a lot of staff. We put on a number of courses around mental health first aid, and that will equip staff, whilst I appreciate that's not the physical first aid, it's the mental health side, but that is also skills that people will use, potentially just out and about and in those public-facing roles. But the physical first aid, I absolutely will take that away, and we can look at what we can do around that in terms of delivery as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Councillor Mathers.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. Thank you for the report. I've real faith that HR is changing direction. We've had quite a number of reports where it's I don't know if I would feel excited about this in terms of HR. I don't know others feel that enthusiasm, but it's good to see the passion in driving the development with the workforce. And I really feel that it's in good hands. I wondered a few things really. So I wondered how much the unions had been involved in that kind of staff voice to help shape some of this learning design. There will obviously be some sectors within our within our workforce who, although the skill isn't directly needed for their role, may need other broader skills to kind of improve. I don't want to go to stereotypical kind of literacy and maths, but there may be other wider, it could be personal development in roles that you wouldn't always expect, and particularly those in the non-office environment, help bridging the gap for workers to move into other roles if they are unable to do a role they've got. I wonder what the standards were with agency. So I know they're not our employees as such. They obviously have to fill basic requirements, and I know there's dynamics between taking on agency, but if there's like development or if the offer's the same or we don't necessarily invest there. And then finally around senior management programs. So I'm assuming there's a separate offer from the management program to senior management that may be more costly, not because of their seniority, but because it needs more external input. And if there's mentoring programs, which all London Councils does something along these lines, and how we encourage our directors and senior officers to get the experience they need from other places without obviously releasing them too much from this, but equally, not limiting them and not allowing them to go anywhere else, hopefully retaining them. But it's that kind of, that must look different in terms of directorships and how if we need talent to come through the organisation for those senior roles, and having that local knowledge really benefits us. So just how that might be slightly different from the generic management course.
Thank you. Okay, so the first one around trade unions and the staff voice. So we have an employee engagement working group. I think that's what we call it, and they're sort of becoming our employee voice with the trade unions combined, but it's not sort of that sort of same dynamic that you would have with the trade unions. It's much more talking to the team and getting their feedback, and they actively input to a number of things that we're doing. In terms of the actual learning and development, that group or the trade unions probably haven't been involved in the courses because, again, we've got quite a lot of work to do. We're doing really well, but actually there's a lot of scope for us to be doing a lot more, and we're quite junior in where we're going with this at the moment. So it is certainly something that we can involve them with. In terms of development for staff who might need sort of wider development sort of outside their role or sort of redeployments, we do have a number of courses available. The LMS system that I talked about has a huge volume. I mean, it's hundreds of courses that are available, and they're sort of 10 to 15 minute sort of short, sharp training that you need. Potentially it might be a video, it's slide decks. For those who don't have access to things like computers, although it is available to everybody, it can be used on your home computer, your home phone, your personal device that you have. But I am conscious that not everybody is engages in IT in that way. For our teams that don't engage in that way, it is a bit more of a struggle. It is more of a challenge for us to make sure that we're getting messages to them, that we are engaging with them. So it does take extra effort, and it is potentially somewhere that we need to look at doing more. I think it's much more at a local management level that we can offer that sort of training for them as well. Again, because a lot of our training is sort of potentially online or potentially in person. Again, that's what part of we need to look at to make sure that our training and our development is inclusive for everybody, because everybody learns in a different way. With agency, we rely on the agency to train them to the level that we need them to be. We can't necessarily offer them the same, because we then become blurring that relationship. So it's very much defined that the offering that we have around talent development learning is very much for our employees. However, if we have positions, and obviously we do have a number of vacancies that those agency staff can come on board with us rather than through an agency, then we will absolutely offer that to them. With senior management, we've actually had a briefing from our early careers officer, and he is doing a lot of work around our apprenticeships that we've got available for our managers. So this is looking at team leader and managers and directors. So you're looking at level 5 through to level 7. Potentially, I think there might be a level 3 in there as well. So it's using our apprenticeship levy to be able to put managers onto this training for leadership and development. It is done externally through the apprenticeship levy. There is a need for us to look at bespoke management training, and that is on our sort of to-do list, which should be more internal focusing as well. And with mentoring, a lot of that is at this stage probably being done through London councils. There is a big offering, and they are a great resource. Again, this is something that we need to tap into a lot more, and it's kind of on the list for us to be getting done in the next year to make sure that we are making the most of that opportunity.
All right, thank you. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Chairman. My question, probably quite a simple one. Is there a desire to do a bit of a rebrand of HR? So I was just Googling. I don't know if you subscribe to HR Monthly. They say that 85% of HR leaders and executives feel that it's a bit of an outdated term. And when you look through here and you see it's performance management, it's apprenticeships, it's reward and recognition, it's learning, it's development, it's coaching, all of that sort of thing. Is it head of HR, head of people? It's quite in increasingly few situations do you find that companies have a HR team.
So yeah, one of my objectives that I would like to do is I'd like to get to the point where we rename it that we are people, and we have a talent development team, we have a talent acquisition team, we already have our HR business partner team, or they would be people business partners. So yes, we do need to get there, but at the moment some of what we are doing is still in that sort of old school element of training, learning and development, of recruitment. We need to do, although we've done quite a big shift already, we've got a further shift that we need to do to actually put us in the place where we talk about talent, and it's talent acquisition, it's talent development. We're talking about our people and our talent there. So it is absolutely something that I want to do.
Councillor Matt? Okay. HR has had over the years has had a pretty bad press, hasn't it? Or it seems to have had a pretty bad press anyway. And in some ways, it's been something that you go to and this is probably says more about me than anything else, when you're about to be told off or when you've done something wrong, and yet much more of it is about development. It's about reputation of the institution. It's about, because getting the whole issue about retention, recruitment, training, opportunity, getting all that right is all part of an organisation's outward reputation, which then feeds back to good people wanting to come in, and understanding what staff like about working here or don't like about working here is really important. And I think there's a survey, if it hasn't already been done, it's yet to be done quite soon, which will be quite useful. I think I can't remember which. I know there was one some time ago, and there's yet to be one at some stage. So that'll be quite useful. But but that attraction, not leaving alone the kind of geographical attraction of this authority, but the attraction of opportunity and the way in which people are dealt with, coupled with the fact that we've now got clearly an embedded working from home, whether it's as embedded here or as in other places, I don't know, but attitude, and the way in which that plays into the knowledge of individuals about opportunity and training and so forth. Because the assumption is that if people are in the office, it's a lot easier to pick up and hear about stuff that's going on, whereas if they're at home, they've got to either look for it or be given it, I'm guessing. Or that's the impression I get, not just from here, but in other walks of professional life. So that whole way of managing how people, which they do prefer to work from home, and very often are perhaps more productive because they are at home and not having to travel and all the rest of it, and yet having that collegiate association with the workplace, very much starts from the beginning, doesn't it, when people first come? Because you've just talked about London councils, you've talked about an induction, but a lot of folks coming into local authority for the first time work won't really know what the whole structure is like, not just the structure of the local authority, but the wider Local Government Association, London councils, how it all fits together. So dealing with that end of the market, do we have that more comprehensive information sort of induction at the start of somebody's career, and the extent to which the new version and vision for talent, whatever you're going to call it, is seen as being the selling point for the authority?
So there's quite a lot there, so hopefully I'll cover everything. So one of the first things that you talked about was about attracting people, and one of the things that we need to develop is our employee value proposition, our EVP, and that is saying to people, this is who we are, these are our values, this is what we can offer you, this is the working environment that we can offer you, and this is who we are. And that's a really important piece of attraction, and then that will flow through all of our advertising when we're recruiting. It will flow into our social media, and it will flow through everything. Employee value proposition is a really key thing for recruitment and for talent acquisition at the moment. And also there is very much a change with the generations that we are recruiting. So when you're looking at sort of Gen Z, they're actually looking at not necessarily the roles that will offer you them the most money. Some are, but actually a lot of people actually want to give something back to their community, and they can actually see doing that through the council, because there's services that you have in a council that you don't have anywhere else, and that will give you sort of warm and fuzzy feelings outside of your role. For the employee engagement survey, we are doing that. In actual fact, that is being launched in October, and we're just finalising questions around that at the moment to make sure that we can get a real sense check from our employees about how they're feeling, what we need to work on going forward. we do have a hybrid working model, and that is really important. That is part of our employee value proposition, because a lot of sort of thinking coming out, I'm not sure if it's quite research yet, but a lot of thinking coming out is that the hybrid way is actually what people do like the most. They like the ability to come into the office some days but be at home and flex work also around their lives as well. And that is a key retraction technique for or tool for us, because people want that in their life. If you say you need to be in 5 days a week, our ability to recruit will go through the floor. But I do think having that contact time in the office with your colleagues is also important. As you say, you can pick up on things that are going on. You can ask, you're sat next to somebody and you can ask them how you do that. But also people are very good at using Teams and the sort of tools that you have through Microsoft around that. And I think the final one was around the council world and how that operates when you're sort of very new in. This is my first role in a council, so having gone through that process, I understand the importance of that. And we are really blessed with a great democratic services team who have spent, and they still do, spend a lot of time with me when I'm suddenly questioning what do we do. But part of the induction, we do a light touch on the democratic process, but we do actually have a democratic induction as well that's available, that's run by colleagues in Dem Services. So there is that as well, depending on the level. I think we probably need to make sure it's at the right level for the right people. So within that first induction, we do touch on it, and then for people who need more of it, there is that there. And
just one last thing, slightly making rods for backs. Is there a member input to that information? That sort of induction, whether it's a new person or a new person starting out or a new person coming in at a senior level. Is there an element of a member coming along and just to give a perspective about the other side about what the council does? Or is that not terribly valuable?
We don't have it. And being honest, I hadn't even thought about it. It's something that certainly I can take away and we can discuss the value of that happening. So I'll take that away. Thank you.
Well, it's the other side of the coin, isn't it? And understanding how that works and the various systems and the other organisations that feed into what we do and how we operate with officers and those who we talk to and all the rest of it, like this sort of thing, might be of some interest. If it's not, that's great. But if it is, then perhaps some sort of discussion about that might not be such a bad thing. All right. Unless there are any other questions, that's been very, very helpful. Thank you very much, and we'll no doubt come back to you about those areas we've already talked about. Okay, thanks very much. And thank you, Dan, for sitting in and helping. Right, so let us turn to, and I don't normally like going past 9 o'clock, but I guess we're going to, procurement review number 8, which to a large extent has boiled down to this one page, although these are suggestions for the recommendations that we have before us, conclusions and recommendations, which Democratic Services sent out earlier by email. And it's I think it's still something, well, no, I know that it is. It's still something that we can comment on, and I've asked that Matthew is given sight of this just to double check to make sure that it covers the various bases that we dealt with him on the last occasion when we asked him, well, was it the last occasion, last but one, when we asked him to look at some sort of his wish list for recommendations as well. But I think pretty much this does deal with the vast range of information that we have looked at over these many meetings in regard to procurement, and we've certainly learnt a huge amount from Matthew and his team and from various others about this. So, comments?
Just make the point, Chair, if I may. This is the second piece of information we've received on the day about this review, which means it's been really hard to consider this today, and last time it was hard to consider the other notes that were brought. I'm finding it extremely hard to engage with our final draft and recommendations and conclusions from the report with that late notice. So I just will make that comment, if I may.
No, it's a good point. I think that there have been various reasons why things have sort of perhaps slipped a little bit, but I understand that the full report will come to us at the next meeting. I'll certainly discuss it with Democratic Services to make sure that we get it in good time.
If I may then, Chair, I'm happy to submit between us things in writing.
Yeah.
It might speed the meeting up, but that's if there's points in that, but it would probably be easier for us to submit corrections, support statements, and do it in once we have time to consider, than try and I'd like to compare with previous notes and stuff to make sure it's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I'm struggling just to think about when the next date of the meeting is in October, but this has been quite early for us in September. I suspect it's probably mid-October unless somebody can help me with it. The 19th. Yeah, well, as I thought, that's quite good actually, wasn't it? Slap bang in the middle. Well, sort of. So, if we say, would it be helpful if we say by where are we now? Okay, I don't know what I'm looking at. That's got no date on it. Let's say by the 20-something of this month to have, say, 23rd. That'd be okay. Of this month to have any written representations from members come to myself and to you or to Mark.
Yeah, to me.
Okay. Then that can be pitched in. I mean, I think this is a fairly good distillation, having looked at it earlier. But nevertheless, if there's if there are a number of other recommendations that members want to pitch in for, then I think by the 23rd that would be quite helpful. I mean, there's so much that we do. So the trouble is that there's a lot to get through, and it's and I'm always very conscious of the amount and the detail and the time. Okay, good. All right. Well, we can certainly do that, and everyone can send us their observations and comments. If we can get the draft report to members well before the next meeting, and maybe aim for a week or so after that 23rd date, then that would be quite useful, I think. All right. So that really deals with that one. Just going back to our discussion about HR and our next big subject. So where do we want to be? I mean, I've said what I would like us to be doing, because it really is a very important aspect, and certainly a lot of what Susie said was very helpful and very useful, and that kind of transformation of the way in which that department deal with things is quite interesting, and has already been, I think, the subject of quite a lot of amendment and transformation in the private sector. I think it's taken a little while for the public side to catch up with that, but then that's probably no more than one would expect. But does everybody agree that that's going to be a good area at the very least to look into? Councillor Mason.
Just to state that I feel it's premature. I think I've said that before. Yeah. I think they need more development done. It sounds like Susie's really embraced the challenge of transforming our, whatever it's going to be called in the future. So maybe something else in the meantime would be more useful. I feel we've highlighted tonight the need for maybe a user-led experience more in the council, whether that be through members or customer service complaints and things. So I personally would like us to look at the customer service both facing out and internally, that focuses on how the new technologies that are coming in or have come in are user-friendly, and how customer service is improved and continues to be improved, and how things are resolved with our residents, who are also our customers, but our first priority, and how members can engage with them equally. I think a user-led, that phrase has really captured me in terms of how the council can support officers to continue to be a good experience.
All right. Well, look, if you would like to put that in a more detailed sort of note to me, that would be very helpful. I'm still fairly wedded to this idea about looking at. I'll check with Democratic Services to see where this other review is getting to, but I just feel that there's quite a lot of additional people areas that we could very properly look into. I'm very attracted by this relatively small but really important idea from Councillor Bridges about first aid training. I think it's quite an interesting one, certainly in terms of a building and organisation of this size, and the extent to which we can look into that. I mean, there's lots of the interesting thing about that is I suspect there is a lot of external training that we can get advantage of, more than just the fact of some poor individual in each department being called the first aid officer, which is normally what happens. Councillor Bridges.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a suggestion, really. I know it's early days with that suggestion, but would it be possible to perhaps add that to the work programme, if it permits, as an information item, just to get more of a scoping around it, to see what the makeup consists of, and decide at that point whether it's worth looking at a potential review in the future on it.
So I'm being thick in relation to what?
The first aid.
Oh, okay. Right, yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. Asking for some information about that. I mean, equipment, responsibility, training. Because as a member, I can't think that we've ever had any training about it. Not here. I mean, I've had it for other purposes, but I mean, what do people think? Do you think it'd be useful to have a look at that and to see what the sort of scope and capacity is?
So it'd be worth considering.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll look into that and maybe have some form of information report on the next occasion. Okay. Good. All right. So that's that. Where are we on the?
Just before we move on, if I can just clarify.
Sorry.
If I may, can I just clarify then if we're happy with the 4 recommendations that are listed under number 9, if we take number 3 there as developing a short list for future topics for further consideration.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair. If I may. It notes the guidance. My only one concern with the guidance is that there's a reduction of transparency if the determining of, so the paragraph on page 56 talks about, I understand that, need for new topics, ideas, meetings, provide details, particular aspects, important to differentiate. Have I got the wrong page? No, the right page. There's a bit, there was a bit in it, I may be looking at the wrong page, that was talking about there may be things under review already and cabinet things and officers that are doing. I think if a piece of topic or a topic was not qualifying through the matrix because there was things in the pipeline, there should be clarity on what, not necessarily the exact detail of what's happening, but a kind of, it's a review about this, and to give a bit of context, because otherwise in any democratic process that would be an extremely easy way to go, oh, we can't scrutinise it because something's going to happen in the future, because no one wants to talk about it, whether it be officers or any democratic group. So I'm just concerned that the wording in that guidance could be used to dilute scrutiny. Just as a comment. selection of topic, page 58. Thank you.
Generally speaking, if it's useful for us to know across the subject areas that this committee is responsible for, if there are reviews of any kind, really, being undertaken, it may be something that we want to piggyback, or it may be something that we want to look at the review in any event. But just being alerted as to them would be quite useful, and the nature and scope. I mean, there's always reviews going on of some description. We don't need to know about every single one, but to the extent that it's an aspect of scrutiny, which is what we're about, then I think that would be useful. Councillor Bennett.
I think I'm slightly backtracking, but just to support Councillor Mace's point around user experience, I do think, I mean, I don't sit on this committee. Hopefully you won't be unlucky enough to have me back again, but you never know. But like it or not, people benchmark their online experience against the likes of Amazon, and you log into Amazon and it knows you, and with the swipe of a right thumb, you can commit to spending thousands of pounds if you want. When we expect residents and to an extent councillors to click through 7, 8, 9 pages of a quite dated looking website just to report a bin that's overflowing, I think I know Dan Kennedy mentioned that we were on a journey. I don't know if any councillors are aware of what that journey is and where the destination is and what the plan is, but I think more and more user experience and tailoring and bespoking your technology to the residents, to the councillors, is going to become more and more important. And I think we've made good progress, but we're probably a long way off. I would say that is probably quite a big ticket item that this committee's got quite a good remit to delve into, because like it or not, it's here to stay, and it's only going to improve if collectively, this committee can try and force that change. And I feel the pain from some of Dan's team working with Ian and Dan, where they want to make changes, but individual departments within the council don't want to change their respective form. They're not necessarily seeing the bigger picture, and it is frustrating, but I feel a nudge from this committee and a good in-depth investigation and recommendation might help.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's why I asked the question in the finance about the capacity of individual departments to look at their processes and really look at them, and see where, and it's not just people. I suppose sometimes people get the wrong idea. It's not. It's more to do with how to do what you do better, and possibly more efficiently, which is hard, because if you've been doing something for a while, or you're used to doing something, it's quite hard to, and we all know this in every walk of life and professions or jobs or whatever. It's quite hard to look at your own area and say, well, what I've been doing for God knows how long, it may not be quite right, and yet somebody from outside could look at your way of doing things and go, well, actually, if you did this, your work would be more effective, it would be easier for you, whatever it is, because having that slightly different perspective is, and I suppose that's the value of consultants, to look at it from a different perspective. But at the same time, I can't help think there is value in folk in different departments being able to look at the range of work they do, and then offering a range of better ways of doing it, or more, what would you like to be able to do? type of question, and what's in the way of you doing it. And the problem is sometimes there isn't very much in the way. It's just that there hasn't been a kind of either a feeling for opportunity or a drive to be able to do that. And I think that, you know, having that additional opportunity offered to you by the finance team, for example, may promote some help. But I think, you both make a good point, so we'll have a look at that as well. All right, here we go, bashing my 9 o'clock deadline. Right, Cabinet Forward Plan, number 10, and Work Programme. Well, I think we can just note the Forward Plan, and as far as the Work Programme is concerned, we've got that well in mind. We're getting into the budget review season, which will come along ever more later on. But I think next time it's going to be the finalisation of our procurement report and recommendations, and we've set the timetable for those issues that we've already raised. Okay, any comments or questions on those last two items? All right, unless there's anything else, I will close the meeting.